Hello, welcome to my video. This is Pickles. He's my sous chef. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make ramen. I've gotten a lot of requests for this in the past couple weeks just because I've been making a lot of it. Sharing it with my friends, and when I share the pictures, people are always like, how do you make that? How do you make the ramen? So what this is it's a Shoyu Chintan Ramen, which Shoyu is soy sauce flavoring. Chintan is a clear broth. I'm also going to show you how to make the chashu, which is the rolled pork belly, the tare, which is the flavor component, the noodles, and soft-boiled eggs, and some of the other toppings that go into my ramen. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so this is the seafood broth that I'm starting with. What I do is I soak konbu overnight. You want to get some water in like a Tupperware container. Just let it extract overnight, and the consistency of it will be a little bit goopy, and it'll extract the flavor fully in cold water. So once that's done, which took again 24 hours, just pour out the konbu into a pot, and we're going to bring it to a boil and add in our water. So add about another 1.5 cups of water to it, and then we're going to get our katsuboshi, which is a fermented slipjack tuna flakes. If you can find it, you can buy it online if you can't find it. So you'll boil that for a couple minutes. Once it starts to settle and the flavor is all extracted, you can turn the heat off, strain it, and that's your simple dashi, or your seafood broth, all done. Okay, so on to the next broth, which is going to be our pork, chicken, vegetable broth. So I got a pork neck bone, smoked. I got pork trotters, some rutabaga, some garlic, some carrots, and some ginger. And that's all going to go into the broth eventually. Chop the pork hooves first. Kind of want to split them in half so it gets a little bit of flavor and gets the full gelatin extraction. Soak all the pork in water. What this does is it helps remove some blood, unwanted debris. You'll let that soak for about half an hour to an hour. Take the whole chicken, take off the legs and the breasts, and the wings too. So just remove all the parts because you really want that whole chicken carcass, but you don't need the breasts to go into the broth, so you can just take those off as you're making the broth. And it'll you can put those in the freezer, make some stir fry with it later or something. You don't need them for the broth though. So after you drain the pork, the water that was full of blood, then you want to put the chicken carcass in the giant pot and fill it with water. You can put as much or as little as you want. It depends on how much broth you want to get out of it. Leave some room for the vegetables, which are coming in next. So yeah, you want to slice these vegetables. You don't have to be peeling them or anything, since we're going to strain this all out anyways, but just go ahead and chop everything you need. You want to add the vegetables in after you basically boil the meat components of the broth for about 2 hours on high. Then you want to reduce the heat, add the vegetables in at the 2 hour mark, and then let it boil for about 4 hours after that. You also, as the water's boiling in the first stage of cooking the broth, you'll need to filter out any of the scum that comes to the top of the water. That just makes it for a clearer broth, and it makes sure you get all the impurities out of the broth. So this is when you add the vegetables in. Again, turn the heat down, let it go for 4 more hours, and then it's done. So once you have the second broth ready, you want to portion out the original seafood broth into a few containers, and then this is when you mix the combination of the first broth and the second broth. This is called a double stock method. It's a very popular method of making ramen broth. Step 2, the tare. This is going to be the flavor component that adds all the saltiness to the broth, adds a lot of the flavor itself. I'm using fermented black beans just because they're really cheap. They add a lot of salt. They add a lot of umami flavor. I add some shiitake mushrooms, some Aniboshi, dried sardines. I use koikuchi, and usukuchi soy sauce. That's a light soy sauce and a dark soy sauce. And basically combining this two gives it a more full flavor. I also use sake, mirin, and some maple syrup for a little bit of sweetness. What the mirin does is adds a little bit of sour flavor, which kind of gives it a full-bodied flavor. It has sweet, sour, umami, has all the components you need, as well as salt. A cup of water, and a half cup each of usukuchi and koikuchi soy sauce. I add about 2 tablespoons of sake, a splash of mirin, and then you remove the heads from the Aniboshi. I think I've added about 1/4 cup of Aniboshi. You can add however much you want, just depending on how seafoody you want your ramen to taste. So once you remove the heads, you can kind of just add it to the pot with the sake and the soy sauce and the water. Add your salted black beans. Again, you can use as much as you want. This gets filtered out once it's done. Add your shiitake mushrooms. This adds a really good umami flavor. And I add some maple syrup. It helps to kind of taste it as you go. It's going to be extremely salty, so be aware of that as you taste it. You might not want to swallow it. But just to get the exact flavor you want, the exact amount of sweetness to saltiness ratio, you'll want to taste it. So you want to boil that for about 45 minutes, and then you strain that and store it. And on to the next part, which is the chashu. So the chashu this is about I think a couple pounds of pork belly. What you want to do is roll it up as tight as you can with the fat side out. Get some butcher's twine or some string, and you just tie it off to kind of make it retain that shape. What we're going to be doing is boiling this or broiling it for a couple hours to basically cook it enough of the way through. Also giving it some basically a barbecue flavor, so a mixture of some salty, some sweet components. So you get some aromatics here. We've got garlic and ginger. You can kind of slice them up roughly. They don't have to be super fine. And then bring the chashu to a boil and scoop off any scum that appears from the top, similar to how we did it in the broth. Add in your aromatics once you've done that. It can be kind of hard to filter off the scum if there's floating pieces of garlic and stuff. Add about 1 cup of soy sauce. This is the koikuchi soy sauce, just the dark soy sauce, normal kikkoman stuff. Glaze it with honey. I use maple syrup as well, just to add a lot of sweetness. Again, this kind of is a barbecue. What you're going for is kind of a barbecue flavor. So I added some sake. Here's my maple syrup. And I also add a little bit of rice vinegar, just a splash. So if you don't have a drop lid, which I don't have, you can actually use a ceramic bowl. What a drop lid does is it presses down against the chashu as you're cooking it. You also want to roll this occasionally. Basically, you want to see it cook for about 2.5, 3 hours even. Sometimes 2 hours is fine. You can go back and baste it more if you want, add some more flavors in. And you will want to keep the sauce once you're done with this, so make sure you taste it and make sure it tastes good and it's what you want. But yep, just keep it on the boil. So once it's all taken out, you want to store the chashu in the fridge, but this is the point where you make soft-boiled eggs. Soft-boiled. So you boil the eggs for about 6.5 minutes, peel them, and then just store them in the sauce like this. They'll get that nice brown color in about a day, and that's perfect for putting on ramen. So once the chashu's been in the fridge for about a couple hours, it'll kind of solidify, and that's when you can start slicing it. And as you see here, it kind of peels off really nicely. You'll want a torch later on too. Basically. Okay, for the noodles, we want to have about 80 grams of water. And then you're going to put about 2.5 grams of sodium carbonate. Or sorry, 1.5 to 2 grams of sodium carbonate. And about 2 grams of salt. So it's 1.5 to 2 grams of sodium carbonate for alkalinity, and then about 2 grams of salt. You want to mix that in with the water, and it creates what's called kansui, or an alkaline water. If there's chunks of sodium carbonate in there, you can filter them out. I just use a strainer to filter them out so that they don't get in the dough. So you get about 400 grams of flour, and you kind of slowly mix in the kansui. You probably only want to do a couple tablespoons at a time of water, and you just mix the heck out of it. You just stir as fast as you can until its consistency is kind of powdery, loose flakes. Once you get all the water mixed in, you can kind of compress it, and then you want to pop it in the freezer or the refrigerator. I usually just put it in a freezer bag, and you want to let it rest for about 30 minutes. It should have kind of a loosely packed consistency. And then you store that in your fridge. This is the dough after it's been stored. As you can see, it's kind of got a squishy texture to it. What we want to do now is compress it even further. So take a cardboard box, put the container with take the freezer bag, and you take the freezer bag and the cardboard box, and you want to layer it so that you don't accidentally step on the bag and pop it or anything. I usually just kind of lay the cardboard over top of it and then just compress it with my feet. What this does is it's solidifying the dough into one solid shape, which you can then roll out and cut. Shout out to Pickles right there. So cut the dough in half. I have an old pasta maker. If you don't have a pasta maker, you can roll it out. It just takes way longer to do, especially with these low hydration noodles. You can add some more water and make it more kind of like an udon noodle if you want it to be easier to roll out. This actually takes probably 10 or 20 minutes per piece of dough to roll out just because it's so tough. You want to kind of laminate it, develop some gluten as you're rolling it, but it is very dry and it will take a while. So just a heads up. Once you've been rolling your dough out for a while, you'll want to get out your pasta maker, coat the dough, sometimes with some flour or cornstarch works too. And you want to start using the rolling setting in your pasta maker to kind of just, again, increasingly make it thinner. I usually change the settings quite a bit to get the desired width of the noodle I want. This can take a while. That's why I sped the video up a lot, just because it takes a while. Okay. So once your your sheet of noodles is the desired width or consistency, thickness that you want, you can go ahead and put it through the pasta part. Again, you can cut the edges off with a knife and then coat it with some cornstarch or potato starch, whatever you have handy, just so that the noodles don't stick together if you're putting them in the fridge afterwards. So these are the noodles. They're all done. Look at that. So now we're ready to assemble our ramen. As you see here, I've got some baby corn on the stove. I've got the pot with the mixed broth cooking. And then I usually get a saucepan to cook the tare. Just kind of heat it up. So I roast the baby corn. I've got some chashu slices, and I hit it with a torch just to give it that extra crispy outer exterior. These are super fatty cuts of meat, so anytime it gets hit with an open flame, it'll just crisp up really nicely, and it'll give it a really good consistency, really good texture. You can also grill it on a pan if you want. If you don't have a torch, that's another option. So the other toppings I like to put on ramen, I like to put scallions. I just have sliced jalapenos and sliced mushrooms there. Okay, so if you bring a large pot of water to boil, Get your noodles ready and get a strainer. You can just cook the noodles directly in the strainer. Kind of shake them around and stir them around to kind of make sure that they don't stick together. Depending on the thickness of your noodles, mine were super thin, so it took like 2 minutes to be fully cooked. Once those are ready, take them out. Make sure to shake them out a lot because you don't want too much leftover water in the noodles themselves, because they're going to absorb a lot of broth if they are allowed to dry. So yep, stirring the noodles as they're cooking. And once you feel like they're ready, just pop them out. So like I said, the broth and the tire are all being heated up as you're going. Once you're kind of ready to put all the pieces together, you have all the vegetables sliced, have your chashu ready, you have your eggs that you prepared before. So when you're putting it all together, I usually go with a ratio of about 3 ladles of broth to 1 ladle of tare. And you can kind of mix and match and see what your desired consistency to how salty you want your ramen to be, how not salty you want it to be. And you kind of just get the noodles in the bowl, you get the broth. It should be pretty simple. Put the toppings on it as you want, and this is your final bowl of ramen. This is a really simple, it's nothing super complicated going on here, but all the flavors and all the time you took making this broth are really going to shine when you taste the final product. This tastes amazing. I had friends over, I fed it to them, they loved it. So hope you enjoy. If you try this on your own, I would experiment with different toppings, different vegetables in the broth, or different cuts of meat if you want, and just kind of make it your own. That's the best part of ramen, is kind of experimenting and finding out what makes the best bowl, or the best bowl for you. All right, so thank you very much. Hope you enjoy.